Thank you so much. So, yeah, I'm Felix, this is Karsten, and today we will talk about emissions. This is not the first time you're hear about emissions of cars, right? It is not the first time I'm here to talk about emissions of cars. And it was 10 years ago that this made the news. Volkswagen was caught cheating in emissions testing, the news said, right? The EPA figured out that Volkswagen was having a special software that would cheat at emissions testing. This made the news. You could hear about it everywhere. This is the Tagesschau. And basically, everyone told how they allegedly used software that circumvents emission testing. The special software was used, and it was all software, right? So software, right. Obviously, I did the only same thing. I extracted the ECU from my car, I extracted the software from it, I threw it in a disassembler. I spent a lot of sleepless nights on it. And I figured out how the defeat device actually works. And I held 2 talks about this for different cars, one in 2015, one in 2016. But let's step back a little bit and talk about defeat devices. What are they? Why do companies build defeat devices? What is the thing with emissions? So for this part, I welcome Karsten here, and he will guide you through the basics of vehicle emissions in diesel cars.
So thank you for the invitation. So diesel engine, this is a high compression of air, very higher than in the petrol car. And injection is then, the pressure is so high that it is self-ignition. And you don't need a spark. And what you gain from this is that you have a high difference between temperatures and pressures before and after, and this makes an efficient machine, a heat power machine. And so you need less fuel and have somewhat less CO2. And of course, there is also a disadvantage. This is you have somewhat high emissions from diesel cars when you compare it with petrol engines. And I give you now an overview so that you understand what it's all about. So you have carbon monoxide. This is poisonous. There has been a solution. You add an extra catalyzer after the motor. Then you have these hydrocarbons. You know them from 2-stroke engines, these little 2-wheel vehicles, which make the whole street smell. And you can use the same catalyzer to get rid of this too. Louder. Oh, OK, I try. So you have particle matter. This is soot or fine particles coming out of your exhaust. And this is mainly from burning, but also somewhat from abrasion, so from the wheels and stuff like this. And with Euro 5 standard, there has been a new system, a diesel particle filter. And this works very nicely. So these are the ones who are really poisonous. And then you have two more. Sulfur dioxide, it's somewhat toxic, and we had a solution for this. This is fuel with low sulfur, so cleaned fuel. And then we have, last not least, the nitrogen oxides, NOx, or the NOx, simply. And this is all what is the Dieselgate about, because this is the last class of substances which is harmful. It's not good for people who have problems with their lungs or people who work hard. You don't get cancer or stuff like this like before with the other things, but it's still not good. So the last problem is the NOx problem. And although the particles are worse, but still we want to get rid of them too. And this is a little overview over the general tendency or trends in air pollution in Germany, for example, over the last almost 20, 30 years. So it's getting better, but we have still work to do. And cars have some part in this. So here I have tried to find a slide for you where you can see where is the natural source for NOx and which is the human-made part. So on the left side, see the natural part, and there's microbes in the soil, mostly, but also lightning, because the air is then very hot, and then you get this NOx substance. And on the right side, you see which is human-made, and mostly it's some kind of burning, whether it's biomass or not, or fossil fuel, that doesn't matter. So three or four parts is this. Then you have 1% that's air travel, you have 7% as ships, and you have 13% as street vehicles. And these are numbers from 2008. And so the street vehicles have some part here. And so the legislation moved on to reduce this. You see from left to right, you see different Euro standards for emissions. And you see on the left, the blue is the NOx part, and the gray is the particle mass part. So you see it's reduced very much. And what is notable is that with introduction of Euro 5 in the middle, especially the particle matter is addressed, which means that the cars have to have this diesel particulate filter. And later, with Euro 6, you see that the NOx part is also reduced about to 1/3 or so. So the legislation went on very quickly. It's only a few years. And then here you see a real road measurements, what happened then. And you see the two different colors, gray and blue, or black and blue, are two different data sets. And you see the different Euro standards. So the cars, the measurements have been sorted into different standards. And you see that up to Euro 5, Euro 4, you have a lot of particle emissions with diesels. On the right side is petrol for comparison. And then when you introduce Euro 5, this is very much reduced. So particles, their work is almost now the same as petrol cars. But we see in the next sheet, we see that this is not the case with NOx. This gave reason for suspicions. And you see here also Euro 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And you see the legislation here with the red bar. It is going down, the limit is going down, but the emissions are not going down. Only with Euro 6 do we now get a significant emission, and with the newer Euro 6 standards, C and D, then it is better. You see we're really going down. But until the Euro 6B, it's not where it should be. And so some people warned about this, and I simply quickly want to show you how to measure this stuff. So this is a lab setting. You have a car which is on a roller bench, and you have this huge pipes and everything measuring the exhaust. And you collect it in a big bag and measure the weight, and this is basically what happens. And then the next step is a mobile measurement, a real driving measurement. It's called a PEMS system. And you put it after your car behind the exhaust and measure it directly when driving on the road. It's much better, in my opinion, but it's also very expensive. And then last method we have is laser measurement, where you place your laser along the road, for example, and let all the cars drive by. And this is very elegant because you don't need a lab. You get a lot of measurements, but there's one thing. You have to take a photo of the license plate, and then to get to know what kind of car you are seeing here. And the advantage, at least, is that you have a lot of measurements in real situation on the road, in your town somewhere, in Brussels, in London, in Hamburg, and can check what is going on here, and which cars do all the pollution. And here is a little slide showing the problem with the NOx. On the lower axis, you see a temperature of your flame. On the left axis, to the top, is the air ratio. And you see this orange balloon and this gray balloon, and they denote somehow the gray thing is where you get all the fine matter, all the particles, because your combustion is not well enough. And the yellow or orange thing is where all your NOx is created. And basically it says when you have not enough air, then you get all the soot and particles. And if your temperature is too high, then you get all the NOx, and it quickly produces more NOx. And so one thing they had is there are several curves here, and they had one method in the motor to feed back exhaust gas into the input, and this is called EGR. And you see with different levels of EGR, you can get away from the NOx balloon here. So this was one solution to reduce the NOx. But now we have the problem that we want several things at once. We have conflicting objectives. So if you're an engineer, you ask, what should I do? What is the target? What is the objective? And they say, tell you all these things, and then you say it doesn't work. So basically it says, we want low fuel consumption. This was top on the list for a long time. Then we want low emissions. We want a silent engine, not a loud engine. We want that the engine works smoothly and reacts quickly if you want something from it. You want durability so that it works not only for a few days. And you have the problem that at the same time you face the complexity of your hardware and software if you put all the new things into your engine. And this introduces a lot of costs during development and manufacturing. And of course, if you own such a car, it means it's more expensive in maintenance. And to make it worse, you need it for all different engine states and also all transitions between stages. If you go off the pedal, if you accelerate very quickly, if it goes uphill, downhill, or it changes very quickly, then so this is for an engineer the things to solve. And just shortly for the NOx, so as I said, they are created at high temperatures, but also if you have too much oxygen. You need some oxygen for your fuel. It's not good if it's not enough, but if you have too much oxygen, it's also bad. It's good for your efficiency, but it's bad for NOx. And in the engine, they had several things they did. They did a later injection. They had charged air cooling in front of the input intake. They had a turbocharger. You find it in every diesel motor today, diesel engine today. You have this exhaust gas recirculation. You take exhaust gas and put it back in front, EGR. And this is in the motor. And then we have measures after the engine. So you have a storage catalyst. And I'll show you a picture in a minute. And you have an SCR catalyst. So two optional catalysts after the engine and things in the engine. And then you have still the problem with this turbocharger and everything that your diesel engine is loud, so called diesel knock. And for this, they had a precise injection, very small amount, before the main injection. So they had a solution for this. And still you have some soot and fine particles, too much of them. So additional injection after the main injection. So then this is better. But still you fight with the problem that you have less fuel efficiency, so more CO2. And so this is sometimes called the triangle conflict of objectives. So performance, how it works, how well it works, cleanliness, so emissions, and economy, so fuel efficiency. And the problem, the root problem of all this was that the NOx conflict with all others. It's the last of the things we have to solve, but it conflicts with all we did before. So this is the root of all the problems with Dieselgate. One moment. So this is an example of a Euro 5 motor. And you see denoted with 1, this is the particle filter. No, this is the oxidation catalyst. And with 2, this is the storage catalyst. So this motor has already a storage catalyst after the motor. And 4, this is the particulate filter. And you need some sensors and stuff additionally, so it's a bit complicated. Now with there's a second catalyst, this SCR catalyst. And you see in one image that it's more expensive and more complicated, but it has the advantage, it is, you can reach much better emissions with the system, but it's more expensive. So if you buy a car, it's more expensive. No way to change this. And this is an example. You have to add a fluid. Maybe some of you know this AdBlue. And you have to spray it into your exhaust gas, and then you have a catalyzer who cleans this up. So it's a bit expensive. So they try to get rid of this if possible. So it's possible without SCR catalyzer, usually for small cars. It's just a typical application. So these are real data now. I was interested in this, astounded me most when I was new to this topic, when I compared different manufacturers. It's not the same. It's a problem of the whole business, but the companies, the manufacturers are good or not good. So the worst one are at the bottom here. And I like to cite a few of them. So Renault, Nissan, which work together. SsangYong, I think Chinese. Fiat, Alfa, Jeep, Dacia all belong together, I think. Chevrolet, Honda. Okay, where is Volkswagen? The whole thing started with Volkswagen. Well, it's in the middle. These are Euro 5 cars, okay? So these were current when the thing started. So Volkswagen Group is in the middle, and the best ones were Mini, Toyota, BMW, Land Rover, Mazda. Okay, now Euro 6, the later norm, where it's the limit, the allowed limit is lower. And here, on the right are the worst, on the left are the best. And where is Volkswagen? This was a surprise. It's on the left. It's one of the best. Volkswagen, Seat, Skoda, Audi, BMW, Mini, Mazda, Honda. And who are the worst? Fiat, Suzuki, Renault, Nissan, Opel, Vauxhall, Hyundai, Mercedes-Benz, Kia, Ford. So you see, the problem is with all the manufacturers. It's the general problem of this type of motor. And Volkswagen Group, they had, with the new motor types, prepared for Euro 6, better than the other ones. So this was very interesting. I was very surprised. And I think you will present the next part.
Yeah, thank you, Karsten, for giving this introduction. So I'd like, again, you to focus on the left axis, which says how many times this is over the Euro 6 limit. So we're not talking about how close they are to the limit. We're talking literally about double digits number of how many times do they emit more than they are allowed to do, right? Even with Euro 6. So those are quite impressive numbers, so that there must be a larger problem behind that. So let's take a look at defeat devices. And I'll start with a classic, the acoustic function, right? You all have heard about it. The code name for what Volkswagen implemented in their ECUs was acoustic function. And when I started with all of this, I looked on the internet, of course, to find stuff. And I figured out not a lot of people are interested actually in emission analysis of vehicles. I was the only person trying to that I could see that tried to reverse engineer ECU software for emission analysis. However, I found there was another large group of people who were doing the exact same thing of reverse engineering diesel software, and that were the car tuners. And that was kind of lucky because they have a pretty well-known tuning forum where people post stuff, and they posted a lot of interesting documentations there that they used for their tuning purposes, but that I could use to make some sense of the history of the acoustic function. So it all started, at least from what I can see, in 2002. This is from the documentation of the EDC16. EDC is electronic diesel control. It's the software that interfaces with all the electronics, all the electronic parts on a diesel engine. And in 2002 already, there was something that was called acoustic function. And if we look closer, actually, this acoustic function dealt with a flap, and it has the comment that when the flap is closed, there's an undesirable acoustic change. So it appeared that in 2002, there was an acoustic function, but it was really all about acoustics. As far as I can see, there's no emission impact on this functionality. It's purely something acoustic. But this changed in 2003, and this is from some change list. And what we can see here is that they added an acoustic package, the influence of injection characteristics shortly after start. And I guess that's one way to describe what they did. The interesting thing here is that all the other changes they're mentioning there have references to some sort of a spec, or I don't know what it is, but the acoustic package doesn't mention any reference. Okay, let's take a look at what it actually is, what they added in 2003. It deals with a function that in German is called Betriebsbereichsauswahl der Pilot-Injection-Freigabe im Einspritzkoordinator. And I think we need a translation of that. So what is that? The injection curve is what defines how many fuels injected over one stroke of the engine. And for diesel engine, you have a main injection, and you have a pre or pilot injection and a post-injection. And there's something that coordinates that, specifically one thing that deals with the pilot injection, the one before the main injection. And there's an element that enables or releases these things depending on the engine operating range. That's how the name comes. So in simple words, this thing controls when pilot injections are enabled. So pilot injections, let's see what they are. So you want diesel because of the diesel benefits of higher fuel efficiency. Okay, that's fine. But a diesel car, if you don't do any special things, doesn't have a great sound, right? So you want the engine to sound better, and you can do this with pilot injection. They will remove or improve the sound to not sound like a tractor, which I guess is what most people want. However, additional fuel means you now have a lower fuel efficiency. So really, you want three things, right? And this is one of these things where, well, you have to pick two. You can't have all three. Well, let's think. Maybe we can. So this is what the acoustic function deals with. Let's take a look at how it actually works. It's a number of range checks that check things like coolant temperature, fuel temperature, atmospheric pressure, and a few other things, and then sets some internal variable. Why does it matter what the coolant temperature is? Well, because in the test cycle, as it's prescribed in the regulation, you have to keep the car at a very specific temperature range. So if the car is then in that temperature range, chances are high-ish that it's actually in a lap, I guess. They combine it with a few other parameters like the height, and they allow the test driver to press the acceleration pedal to easily swap between the two modes. And eventually, when all these conditions are true and the car believes it's in a test lab, then it will set a variable that controls the pre-injections, and in this case, disables the pre-injections for higher fuel efficiency. So, looking back at this, we want three things. We can only have two. Well, we can select, right? In regular operation, we do the pre-injections, and we make this car sound great. And if we detect we are likely on a test stand, then we can sound bad and have the better fuel efficiency. So problem solved. Well, as you could see, the conditions were kind of vague, and it's only like a temperature range, which could happen in other situations. So in 2007, something was added to this function, which you've probably seen before, the driving curves. This is done by basically having a number of curves, and if each curve gives an expected driven distance, there's an upper and a lower bound based on the engine runtime, and if we are outside of that bound, then we are likely not in that test cycle. And this is how it looks like. Those are the curves that I found in my personal car's firmware, and this is the test cycle, and this is the test cycle converted to distance over time, and if we overlay them, well, you see what it does, right? So this thing detects the test cycle. That's nothing new, but initially they started with 5 curves. They later extended it to 7 to check for other test cycles, I guess, and then later they changed it to 10 because they needed to support North America, which is their unique set of test curves. And there's a specific test curve that deals with the North American standard, or specifically California driving tests. And it turns out this one is quite open in the beginning because they couldn't constrain the curves better or something. And that apparently happened to give a lot of false positives where the car would think it's in a test cycle, but in reality, we were just starting to drive the car. So they did the only thing they could do, right? They added a check for the steering wheel angle. So if you move the steering wheel, then very likely you're not in a lap. Yeah, that's how they solved the problem. Thank you. But This is still all about acoustics. Well, no, they added something that also controls the exhaust gas recirculation, which is this method you want to reduce NOx emissions. Because what they wanted was to have a cheap car that does not require any of the more fancy emission after-treatment systems like the SCR catalyst that Karsten talked about. At the same time, they would want super great fuel efficiency, of course, and they also want the low NOx emissions. And you can only have two, well, but during regular operation, the car would operate without the EGR, give you all the benefits of like high fuel efficiency, high drivability, and if it detects it's on the test stand, it would go into a mode where it has lower NOx emissions at the cost, at the downsides of the EGR system. So if we look at the history of this specific defeat device, we see two things. On the one dimension, it became more specific over time, better in detecting actual lab conditions. And on the other axis, it became more powerful. It would control more things in the engine. So it's kind of the slippery slope from acoustics to a full-blown cheat thing. If we sort what we saw, so we saw an environmental parameter check. We saw a check of temperature, atmospheric pressure, and things like that. We saw something that matches the driving cycle with the driving behavior, the distance over time thing. And we see something that measures driving parameters like the steering wheel angle, which only happens in the real world and not in the lab. And what we saw was an activation of different combustion parameters or a different usage of emission after-treatment systems, so the effect of that. And that combined allows us to do measurements where a small variation in the driving style results in a pretty large measurable emission change because the car thinks it's no longer in the test cycle. And that combined, well, is a defeat device. Defeat devices are not unique to Volkswagen. This is a completely different manufacturer. This is one I talked about before, so let's make this really quick. This is a PowerPC CPU, so I threw it in a disassembler. I found checks like atmospheric pressure. I found things where if you drive the very same thing, so you can see here engine speed and vehicle speed on phase 1 and phase 3 are exactly the same, but we can see that the car, even though it's the same driving situation, will behave quite differently in terms of emissions, and specifically the EGR, and this is triggered by this phase in the middle where we exceed what is typically being driven in the NEDC. This is quite compressed, but basically it tells you the car can run in two different modes with very different emissions at the end of the engine. And to be clear, this is not automatically a defeat device because you can have a car that has emission after treatment. So you can use the engine and run it in a less efficient way with a lot of EGR, exhaust gas recirculation, and it will run very clean, but also not very efficiently. So the SCR catalyst here is the emission after treatment system. It's a catalyst at the end of the exhaust pipe, and it will remove the remainder of the NOx, and you result in low tailpipe emissions. But at the same time, you want the larger overall efficiency. And what you can do is to run the engine in a more efficient way. It will produce more NOx, and use the SCR catalyst to remove that NOx, and you still end up with the low tailpipe emissions and the larger efficiency. However, what this software did was it would also enable this more efficient mode in the engine without ensuring that the SCR catalyst is actually ready to remove all of the remaining NOx emissions. And the SCR catalyst requires a certain temperature and requires this AdBlue fluid. So that is not always it is not always in a state to remove a lot of emissions. And the software would switch to this mode anyway. So in this system, we see EGR combined with an after-treatment system, and which is supposed to give us the full fuel efficiency, the low NOx emissions. But the problem is it also should work when the catalyst is cold, and those are, again, three things we can't have. So in regular operation, it would always run the fuel efficiency, and if the catalyst is cold, it would just have higher emissions. And when it detects the test, then it would switch its behavior and run in a mode with lower NOx emissions. So what we saw here is, again, environmental parameters like temperature and atmospheric pressure. But this time we didn't see it tracking the test cycle. It only tracked certain engine operating points like RPM and torque, and saw if this is some driving that is unlikely to happen in a test cycle. And if it detected that, it would activate different combustion parameters, produce different emissions, and again, there's the situations where small changes in driving style result in large measurable emission changes. And I think it's safe to say that this is the feed device as well, even though it does not specifically track the NEDC curve. But the feed devices don't have to be just in the engine ECU. This is not an engine ECU. This is a gearbox ECU from an automated gearbox. And this is some quite unique architecture, an SH2H, and honestly, reverse engineering this firmware was a mess. A lot of long code without a lot of structure. So we kind of approached this from a different angle. We logged driving. We logged data while driving in the car, and what we observed here is that it would switch from a mode that is called warm-up to regular mode under certain conditions. And we tried to find these conditions, and there's something like if you're exceeding a lateral acceleration, like driving a curve, it would switch from warm-up to DS. Or if you do a kick-down event, so if the car is standing still and you press the acceleration pedal, it would switch there, and we figured out a few other switching parameters like high acceleration or reverse gear usage, and notably nothing temperature related. So warm-up really is not the right name for it, I guess. And there's also no ability to return back to warm-up once you are out of warm-up mode. And when the gearbox is outside of warm-up into DS, it switches to a different gear profile. So the thing with automated gearboxes is, on the one hand, you want the car to be drivable really well. So that typically means you run it at higher RPMs in a lower gear. That gives you more torque. That makes it more fun to drive. But then, on the other hand, you want low emissions, and that means you have to run it at the lowest possible RPM at the higher gear. And, well, you have to pick two, and you can guess what they did, right? So in regular operation, the car would run at higher RPMs, and when it detected being on a test stand, it would run at higher gears and at lower RPM. So we tried to test this, if that really happened. We took the car, we literally kicked it out of warm-up mode by applying some force, like acceleration force to it. And then we've driven the NEDC, and we did this. So we did the NEDC once in warm-up mode and once in DS mode and looked for differences. And indeed, it uses different gears. And because it uses different gears and the vehicle speed is the same, it uses different engine speeds, and that obviously provides results in different emissions, depending on whether it detected a test stand or not. So what we see here is a detection of driving activity that can only happen outdoor, combined with the activation of different engine operating points, which result in different tailpipe emissions. And then we looked at the measurable emission changes, and we figured out, yeah, there is a change, but it was quite small, honestly. And in both cases, warm-up and DS, it was below the regulatory limit. So this does not appear to be a defeat device, or at least it's not one for NOx, or we don't really know. Anyway, we repeated the test in another lab, and now we got it back, and there were significant changes now, and it would exceed the limit when we did our trick with kicking the car out of warm-up. So what did we miss? Turns out we missed a completely different defeat device that we accidentally triggered when we triggered the gearbox change. So here's what we did, right? This is a log from this. We kicked the car, and then we moved it to the test stand. And it turns out their engine firmware has some code that has a number of highly specific checks of like the sort of, 20 to 40 meters after starting off driving, the ambient temperature needs to be between 25 and 30 degrees, and the RPM needs to be between 920 and 1200, and the turbocharger temperature, and this and that. And it's a long list of parameters that are checked, and only if all of them apply, then it would enable something called the catalyst heating mode. Okay, what is SCR catalyst heating? I already said that an SCR catalyst requires a certain temperature to run, and typically during the early phases of driving, the catalyst is too cold and doesn't work. So you could fix this by adding a second SCR system, so a second catalyst near the engine and a second one like further away from the engine so that it doesn't get too hot. And that is a pretty solid thing and something that modern cars do. But if you don't want to spend the money of that for the second SCR system, what you can do is to actively heat up the catalyst. So when you start the engine and the catalyst is too cold, you would inject more fuel and it would burn and would heat up the catalyst. However, obviously, that increases fuel usage. So, well, what the system did is, in regular operation, it would never do the catalyst heat up. So you run with higher emissions. And if it detects the test stand based on the parameters I've showed you, then it would enable this catalyst heating and would heat up the catalyst. And it turns out when we moved the car, we violated one of these conditions, and the car no longer thought it's on a test, and it would no longer enable the catalyst heating model, and that resulted in the real big change of emissions. So what we saw here is environmental parameters like temperature, the basic stuff, specific pinpoints of driving cycles, this thing where it checks between 20 and 40 meters for some very specific things, and then the activation of different catalyst heating strategies during lap cycles, but not actually when it is physically required, like there's no temperature check or something like that. It's really just based on are we in a lab or not. And that resulted in, as you can see, large measurable emission changes for just a small change in driving style. So this is a defeat device. Moving on to another manufacturer, spending some time on the decompiler. Again, pulling software, throwing it in the decompiler, looking at weird things. And this thing here, I found weirdly specific conditions. So there was something that would check the vehicle speed to be between 65 and 75 kilometers, and something like timers of 40 seconds and 80 seconds. And in total, I found a whole set of weird conditions that I couldn't make much sense of. Well, until I looked at the test cycle and applied these conditions there, and then it gets pretty clear, because what this function is basically a finite state machine does is it detects the end of the test cycle, the so-called extra-urban part, the high-speed part, and it switches an internal variable if it detects that. Well, that is all just static analysis, right? It's just predictions based on software. So what does a real car do? Thanks to some friends at 43 GmbH, they are a company specialized on doing measurements of cars and software first engineering. I got these nice measurements where they actually tried this in a lab. And if we overlay this with what we found in the software, we can see, oh yeah, there's a perfect match, right? Exactly where we expected the thing to happen, that it would find the final condition and enable this test mode. That actually happened in the car. And what I did not predict based on the software was that this test mode would stay on for 60 kilometers. So if you're doing the test once, and typically these tests, when you do emissions testing, you run them multiple times and so on. So the first time it detected this, it would persistently set this flag for the next 60 kilometers. Okay, so what does this flag actually change? So we know it detects the test cycle, but what does it change? And it turns out, so this is a car that has this SCR catalyst. SCR needs this AdBlue. So it's a liquid that is sprayed into the catalyst and then helps the reaction. And you need the right amount of AdBlue depending on what the engine produces in emissions. So there's some calculation where you take the NOx emissions and you multiply them by the efficiency and all of that, and then you can dose the correct amount of AdBlue. And all that code was there and working perfectly, except for a very large step that would reduce the factor based on the historic consumption of AdBlue. And it would basically reduce it to the point that it had a target of an AdBlue consumption value of 550 milliliters per 1,000 kilometers. So it was no longer just based on the physical necessities, it was reduced based on some arbitrary average consumption that they hard-coded. And this is, again, a log from real-world driving, where you can see in the bottom that, indeed, it spot-on gets to the average consumption of 0.55 liters. And this is with the test mode off. This is regular driving. And then if we look at driving with the test mode on, we can see that it doses quite a lot more and uses as much AdBlue as it thinks it needs, and we can see very low tailpipe emissions. And then after the 60 kilometers, the test mode dropped to low, and we can see the engine stops dosing AdBlue because it is way above the average consumption, and you can see the tailpipe emissions increasing. And yeah. So for reference, AdBlue, you roughly need 1.5 to 2.5 liters per 1,000 kilometers, and so the 0.55 liters is significantly below what's physically necessary. Why .55? Well, because someone applied the formula, right? You have a 17-liter AdBlue tank in the vehicle, and you have a maintenance interval of 20,000 kilometers. And if you do the math, it results, and you subtract what's needed for some diagnostics, you arrive at that number. So this is really so to ensure that the AdBlue does not need to be replaced by the user and can be refilled at the next maintenance interval, even though it results in significantly worse emissions. So what we see here is we have a test cycle detection, the EUDC part, with a persistent switch. We have this intentional limit of SCR that makes it less efficient than what it could be. We can see really high emissions in regular driving. This is a defeat device. Here's some other manufacturer, right? Here I'm showing the probability distribution of what we observed in normal driving of the SCR efficiency. So 0 means the SCR doesn't do anything and doesn't remove any NOx. 1 would be it perfectly works and removes all NOx. And you can see here, based on the numbers, that it works really, really poorly. It almost never runs at even 50% efficiency or something. And we looked into the software to figure out why it is doing that. And it turns out there's a whole bunch of categories. But the one category that hits the most is they look at the engine, at the emission mass stream. So they look at how many kilograms per hour of emissions you have. And if that is above a certain limit, the software just says, oh, that's too much emissions. We can't handle this with our catalyst. Apparently, it's too much. We don't even attempt to reduce it by dosing AdBlue. Yeah, except then there was a software update. Eventually, they were forced to do a software update. And it turns out it's much better with the new software. We're now getting efficiency level between 80 and 90% with the same hardware. And the only really thing that changed is that the AdBlue consumption significantly increased to roughly twice as much. So it works. It just requires someone actually wanted to do it. And the customer replacing AdBlue more often. Here again, we see emissions that are optimizing for driving scenarios and test cycles that do not exceed this exhaust mass flow, intentional downrating based on AdBlue usage limit. And you really ask yourself, like, is this really insufficient hardware for the full operating range? Is this bad engineering, maybe? Is this intentional optimization for driving cycles? Either way, it results in high emission in regular driving, so it's a defeat device no matter what the intention was. Yet another manufacturer. So this was actually me looking back at some old logs that I had on my hard drive. And I looked at, like, this was someone in a lab doing the test cycle. At the top, you see a pretty poor resolution of the NHC test cycle. And what we found was that some internal bit in the firmware was magically always true when we were in a test cycle and always false outside that. That was quite suspicious, right? So how did that work? I looked into the software. I found something that has some hard-coded tables. And if you visualize these tables, you see that it somehow matches average speed over time. And average speed, if you think about it, is really distance over time. And distance over time, well, we knew that, right? We can plot the test cycle in that. And yeah, this is not Volkswagen. And it works pretty much the same way as the original acoustic function. We had other manufacturers that would just reduce EGR just if you turn on the AC, right? The AC is not turned on in emission testing. If you turn it on, it would reduce the EGR. Or if you're not driving at the speed range or something. We had this luxury car with a list price that's so high that you don't drive it yourself, right? You buy it with someone driving for you. And we looked at it, and it had horrible emissions. You can see here the regulatory limit, and they exceeded by double-digit numbers. It was one of the worst cars they ever measured. And it turned out that they had to tune down the SCR catalyst because it was not sufficiently large, because it would have been too expensive, I guess. So yeah, that was kind of a speed run through random types of defeat devices I found over the years and documented a little bit that I stumbled across and did some like hacker-type analysis. That's one thing, but the work that Karsten has to do is quite different because he has to exhaustively document these things for a judge. And with that, let me switch over to Karsten again because he will explain a little bit what he does for these things.
Thank you. So what we do is we have to prove for the court with at least 99% safety that this one is innocent or is not innocent. And we do some, what I did is some software analysis of this engine control unit. And
Ein bisschen lauter.
genau. The software analysis, when you take it into this assembler and try to find the functions and the data and see all the references and so. And I compare this to a kind of microscope or a unit test in software development. So where you have a specific function, you test it and you analyze it. But on the other side, you have the measurements on test bench or road. And these are, for me, like black box tests. You have to put the whole thing into a test machine and just look at the output. And so I think this is one example of things which should be researched from different sides in an interdisciplinary way. And especially if you do only exhaust measurements, so you drive 20 kilometers and look at the sum of NOx, you have often difficulties in interpreting what is the reason for what I saw. What if I had driven a little bit slower or faster? Or what if I should have turned my steering wheel a little bit more, or should have turned on the AC or anything? So you are all like someone in the fog. You search something, you don't know exactly what you are searching, and your measurement program is expensive. Each day costs thousands of euros. And I know examples where people measured for 100K euros and still didn't know really what was really going on, and got some puzzling, strange results. So what software analysis can do is it can at least give some causal factors, means some factor where I can see from this follows that, and that I can show you in the software. Otherwise, it's only a correlation. A correlation is, for a judge, not a real proof, because it could depend on some other factors. And so at least you can search for causal factors. And even if you're not completely sure in all you get, you can give the people doing the measurements clear advice. Well, test the steering wheel, test this velocity, test going with, do it kick down in between or something. You can give them ideas for planning of the measurements. And what I personally add always is, at the beginning, I research what has been published to give me more hints. Thank you. More hints for my investigation, because it's very much effort and I have to try to reduce it as possible. Okay, just a little overview. So this binary software, you get a tuner reads the software from the ECU, and you have the real-time operating system code there, and you have the fixed program code there, and you have the fixed config data there. And this is not a bit. It's typically 20,000 data, constants, let's say a temperature threshold, curves, tables, or binary masks like this. And what we can do is what Felix did. For example, you use the diagnostic interface to try to read stuff. And there's more you can do. Then additionally, in software analysis, you have maybe 10,000 variables for different parameters in different modules of your code. And a part of them you have also to reconstruct. And everything must fit and be perfect before you can draw a clear conclusion and give something to the judge as a report. Okay, and I try to be quicker now because we don't have so much time, and it's also a complicated topic. We have tried to press it in 1 hour, but really we would more need 2 days or something like this. So sorry that it's a bit hasty sometimes. What do we do for the people who are interested? We try to find examples of other versions, similar versions of software where we know more, and try to find the corresponding parts of variables, data, functions, and everything. And we do, of course, use our disassembler. I showed it already. And what is very helpful if we find some kind of function documentation of the ECU manufacturer, for example, Bosch. This is also no small treat. This is about 20,000 pages typically, and full of small diagrams. You almost need a microscope to read the names. But it is very helpful if you have something like this. I come to this back. Okay, practically, what I did up to now, it's really brute force, really patient puzzling with 1 million parts. 90% you don't know and don't need, but you must find the correct 10%. So it's a very high effort, and I come back to this. Challenges are you need physics, chemistry, car electronics, software technology, control system technology, combustion engines, and each of this is a study of its own. And of course, you should know your emission regulations, laws, test benches, and everything. As an expert, I need all my legal stuff. You need maybe a certification. You need to visit conferences. You need to read. You need to know your behavior in front of court and everything. And what is also a challenge is that in Germany, you have almost no help from the car manufacturer. No chance. Okay, so this is just to invite you to do this work. We need more people like you. So two short examples. One is the more modern Volkswagen engine, E8288. And this example was a Euro 5, so a bit older standard. And it had no catalyst after the engine. But the published emissions were quite good. So not suspicious. I was quite astounded. And the analysis was really complicated. This is only, each box is a kind of function or some status variables, very complicated state machine. And at the end, the result was that at the final little step, two indices were the same. So at the last step of the whole procedure, they didn't use the information, but used the same table for EGR, so no defeat device. So and this matches the very good emissions. Okay, and conclusion is that you find some data and some functions is no proof that this thing has a defeat device. You have to go through all the complete chain and prove that it does it or does not. Okay, and second example is a very current example. This is an example photo of a motorhome or travel van. And it has also already the newer standard, Euro 6b, which still uses the old test cycle, so the test way of testing it, the old simple curve of accelerating, staying at the velocity, and it has already a double EGR and this storage catalyst I mentioned, which is a bit suspicious because this catalyst is meant for small cars. It has some disadvantages. The simplest one is that the NOx attaches to the inner area of the catalyst. And of course, when half of the area is full, then it doesn't work as efficient. With an SCR system, you continually spray into the exhaust, and it works. But with this type of catalyst, it won't work all the time. At the beginning, it's better. Then it gets worse and worse. Then it has to be cleaned, needs some fuel, and then it starts over again. So also, the emissions were very high, which were published, so 7 to 10 times higher than the legal limit. So I wondered what was the reason for this. And one simple reason is the so-called two-stage type approval. They approve officially and test the base vehicle, which is naked, which has probably maybe no box on it, nothing, which is much lighter, and they test it and it works. And then they sell it to a motorhome manufacturer, and he builds all the travel, the desks and everything, what you need when you travel onto it. And maybe for a ton or 1.5 ton, maybe, a little bit less, so 1.2. And why is this possible? They just approve it without checking it. The car is much bigger, maybe much heavier, but still it has a type approval. How is this possible? And this is because the stage 2 is done. Stage 2 means now they approve and give you the papers for the new car, which is heavier, and it has this small footnote. In a directive, you almost overlook if you don't know what to search for. And the first footnote Q says, if you make the emission pipe a bit longer, and it doesn't matter, it's okay. And then the next sentence is, if the base vehicle is lighter than now your vehicle, then it's okay. And this is the reason why all these motor vans are accepted, although in reality they are much heavier, have much more emissions. Okay, I have to be very quick now. So,
just to the wish list.
Yeah, okay, the result is that we see this huge emission. So, to clean up now a bit, I want to show you as an expert advisor what this means and what my practical things are. I get a direction for evidence, and I must stay within this direction. I get it from the court. If I go outside of it, I risk being biased, and then I'm off. You get about 1,000 pages of paper to read, which are mostly not interesting. The statement of case is very fuzzy. You have no help from manufacturer. And what you need is somehow related software where you can start from. Okay, and I have to do it parallel to my normal work, and always there's this risk of being biased. For example, now I have to be very careful what to say, because if I say one false word, the lawyers will hit me for years with this word. Okay. And, okay, so last page. What I wish is that manufacturers must deposit the binary structure, so the complete information over the binary, and the function documentation. When they get type approval, this would make my work so much easier. And also, I would like that all remote sensing measurements are published, because then you see it immediately where the problems are. It would stop all cheating immediately. And then I would like maybe more prevention and less court proceedings. So good rules, clear rules, well thought through, and of course ban two-stroke engines. And last sentence, a new law for neutrality of experts, and well, that's all for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Karsten.
Yeah.
And this is real, right? The nice thing is I can wish a lot more. I am biased probably already, so I can wish for more things. And I thought about this for a long time, and eventually I copied the slides from 9 years ago, because nothing has changed, right? We still see black boxes in emissions. We still see black boxes that can hurt people by changing emissions. We can see black boxes that can kill people, for example, in autonomous cars. I had this bad analogy about a car manufacturer who does autonomous electronic cars, and maybe like it turned bad and doesn't want to apply to European regulations anymore, but we would be relied to work with that manufacturer to figure out what went wrong. I think we need more transparency. We need access to source code for reviews. That doesn't mean open source, it just means the ability to review. We need control software that it has been designed with reviewability in mind from the start. We need accessible documentation, specifications. We need human-readable code. And most importantly, we need transparency for control software decisions, right? For example, the ability to log why the software is doing something, and the ability to review this at the end. Nothing has changed. It needs to change. It's more important than ever. Thank you very much.